Good morning, everybody. World War I ended November 11, 1918, or the Great War, as it was called then. And on this date, January 18, in 1919, the great nations met in Paris at Versailles for the Paris Peace Conference to try to sort what happened and make for a better future. Two nations who were not there, Russia and Germany. The armistice that ended the Great War was on November 11, 1918. Then the world held its breath. What will happen next? And especially for the countries that had lost millions of men in combat. So if you look at this graph of World War I casualties, on the far left, Russia, then Germany, then Great Britain, then France, then Austria-Hungary. So what about all those dead men? What is going to happen in those countries? Well, in Russia, here's Lenin, the Bolsheviks had pulled out of World War I in 1917. So they're not invited to the Versailles Peace Conference, but they're still a major player. And then here's a soup line in Germany. Germany had terrible starvation during World War I, and the Kaiser had fled, so there was no real government in Germany. Germany was in chaos. So what happens there? And they weren't invited either to Versailles. So here's the map of Europe before World War I. You'll note big empires, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey in the Middle East, Austria-Hungary, basically Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, but they all disappear. Meanwhile, we have big three at Versailles. Georges Clemenceau from France, Woodrow Wilson from the United States, David Lloyd George from Great Britain. Each has its own agenda when they meet on this date in 1919, January 18. And Wilson had come up with the 14 points earlier, kind of a blueprint for what he thought would be world peace. And one of those was self-determination for all people. But what does that mean if you're an Arab? So here's King Faisal in the front, Lawrence to his left, Lawrence of Arabia. So the Ottoman Empire disintegrated. Do the Arabs get their own independence? And then Ho Chi Minh is on the right. Vietnam had been a French colony. Do the Vietnamese get their own independence? So self-determination was a great idea, but it was complicated. So what did happen is the Austro-Hungarian Empire disappeared and new nations came, like Czechoslovakia, you can see it here. Russia, which had lost World War I, sort of, they lose land to Estonia, Latvia, and so on. And Germany has part of its land occupied. The Rhineland, you see that on the left, is occupied by the French army. And in Poland, you can see there's a little gap between the dark green. That was known as the Danzig Corridor. Germany lost that too. And the Allies not only wanted Germany to pay all kinds of money, reparations they were called, but also take the blame for the war. This is called the War Guilt Clause at Versailles. So here the group met at the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. This is where the German Empire had been proclaimed by Bismarck in 1870, so the irony wasn't lost on people. Germany wasn't invited. One of the effects of that treaty is on the German World War I veteran, and here you see Adolf Hitler on the far right. He was a World War I veteran, and the early members of the Nazi Party pictured here were mostly World War I veterans who felt betrayed by their government. They thought they had really won the war, and a lot of anger at the Versailles Peace Treaty fueled the rise of the Nazi Party. Woodrow Wilson, when he came home, campaigned around the country for the Senate to approve the Treaty of Versailles, but it didn't. And you can see in this newspaper, upper left talks about treaty opponents, and the upper right, Wilson actually got sick. He got a stroke and was incapacitated. And John Maynard Keynes in Britain wrote this book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace, in which he, in a way, predicted the Great Depression, that World War I would be hard on the economies of Europe. And this cartoon by the Nazis showing the stab in the back, Jewish interests, fueled the rise of the Nazi Party and is one of the legacies of World War I.